Tell the Pharaoh, let my people go. Tell old Pharaoh, let my cousin grow.
There we go. Man, tough crowd. I thought that was really funny, but I mainly only heard the audience laughing, but that's fine. I feel like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air just really taught me how to be funny. Just kept watching that show over and over as a kid. Really got a lot of my humor from Will Smith. I'm not planning to slap anyone anytime soon, but nonetheless. One quick thing I want to address before we get into it tonight. The last time I preached, the fire alarms did go off. I don't know if you were here for that. So from our end, we have some more robust fire safety protocols in place. So if you happen to hear an alarm, I don't know if it's a me thing, but the muster point is like on the corner of 23rd and 66, okay? So if you hear an alarm, run. Just get out. Get out of the building, okay? Awesome. So tonight we're diving into the third part of our Did I Stutter series, which is walking through the story of Moses in the Old Testament of the Bible. Now, I think that everybody is entitled to one crazy, life-altering event in their time on earth, whether it's something positive or negative. But it's just one big, crazy thing that you were permitted to coin as your personality for the rest of your life. I don't know if I've had that thing happen to me yet or not. I don't think so. But if I could have chosen anything to be my moment, the thing that I would just tell everyone about, is if I could have been on the show Extreme Home Makeover. I don't know if any of you have heard of it before. Man, no one's getting all my 2 people. Okay, well, for those of you, kind of uncultured here, but it's okay. Basically, it was a show where your family, you'd just be doing your thing one day, and then these people would knock on your door and be like, hey, you're going to Disney World, which is already great. So you go to Disney World for a week. They tear your house down completely, and then they rebuild it to something really cool. And then the kids would have these super cool themed rooms. One kid could be like, I like puzzles. And then their whole room would just be puzzles, left and right. That kid better like puzzles for the rest of their lives. But I just thought that would have been the coolest thing. Alas, not my story to share. But here's the thing. I feel like Moses, he barely got a break from the craziness of life. Jeff started the series off by talking about how there was a massacre of Jewish baby boys in Egypt. So Moses' mom put him in a basket in a river in hopes to spare his life. And I think that story in itself deserves a Netflix documentary, maybe a spot on a talk show, and a ton of Instagram brand deals. I could see all of the baby bassinet companies trying to DM Moses' mom to be sponsor, here's a free something for you. And then last week, Reuben shared the time where God spoke to Moses through a burning bush, which again, I don't know about you, I haven't really heard of anyone experiencing that before, but that's definitely a story I'd be listening to at a party or on a podcast. And today is really no different. It's another story that I find just so crazy to fathom because of the insane events that take place. And it's the account of the 10 plagues that come over Egypt by God through his prophet Moses. So let me paint a picture of what happens, how it plays out, and then we'll go over why it matters for us today and how it impacts our faith and the way that we live our lives. So a little history lesson to start us off. At this point in time, the Israelite people were living in Egypt, and the Egyptian government, they felt threatened by the size of the Israelite population. They thought that they were outnumbered and that if a war were to break out, that the Israelites would join forces with the Egyptians, their enemies, and they would fight against them. So in order to control the population, the Egyptians did a couple things. The first thing is that they made the Israelites their slaves. And the masters placed over them were extremely brutal and ruthless in their demands. It was just a really terrible situation. And then the Pharaoh, who is the ruler of Egypt, he ordered 2 Hebrew midwives to kill any baby boys that they delivered. And when they didn't do that, the next ploy, as I mentioned before, is a decree for every newborn Israelite baby boy to be killed. So things aren't exactly great for the Israelites at this point in time. There's ethnic tension, they're being oppressed, and this oppression, it continues for quite some time and even under different leadership. But we can see an upcoming turning point in Exodus 2:23-25, where it says this. Years passed, and the king of Egypt died, but the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those were their ancestors. He looked down on the people of Israel and knew it was time to act. So this kickstarts God's plan to free the Israelites from slavery. God calls Moses through the burning bush, like we talked about last week, and chooses him to be the one who will lead the people to freedom. And later in Exodus 7, God lays out the game plan for Moses and his brother and right-hand man, his name's Aaron, for how the people would be released from captivity. And it says this, I will make you seem like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. Tell Aaron everything I command you, and Aaron must command Pharaoh to let the people of Israel leave his country. But I will make Pharaoh's heart stubborn so that I can multiply my miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Even then, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you. So I will bring down my fist on Egypt. Then I will rescue my forces, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with great acts of judgment. When I raise my powerful hand and bring out the Israelites, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So Moses and Aaron obey what God told them to do and go to Pharaoh and demand for their people to be set free. They even have like this cool party trick where Aaron throws down the staff that he's holding and it turns into a snake. Now, I'm not a fan of snakes, but I do have to admit that that is pretty cool. And if it were me, if I was a Pharaoh, I'd be like, yeah, you can go. It's fine. Yeah, I love it. You know, if this whole let my people go thing doesn't work, just boom, snake right there. But the Pharaoh is not as easily convinced. He has his own magicians come and they do the exact same thing. They also turn their staffs into snakes. And that sounds like my very own personal nightmare. Just snakes everywhere. Terrible. And even though Aaron's staff swallows the staffs of the magicians, the Pharaoh's heart is hard towards the Israelites. And he refuses to listen, just like God said that he would. So now, the 10 plagues, they start. And they are a series of divine consequences that were intended to persuade Pharaoh to let the Israelites leave Egypt and be freed from slavery. It takes all 10 for the Israelites to finally leave, and they are all terrible. I'll tell you that right now. For real, if any of these things were to happen in Edmonton, I'm gone. I'm gone. I don't care where I'm going. I'll go back to Red Deer. I don't care. I am out of here. It's the Red Deer jokes. Okay, that's what you guys need to laugh. All right, noted. Okay, so let me just list the 10 plagues so we're all on the same page, okay? So the first plague, all the water in Egypt turned to blood. Ew. The visual, the smell, it's a no from me. I guess, you know, we're not going paddleboarding this weekend. Leave the jet skis at home. We're not going for a cute girls' river float. I can't even swim, so I wouldn't have done those things anyways. But just not it. And even more so, other than just summer fun, you know, that eliminated the clean water sources for the people. So not a good situation. That's the first plague. Then the second plague, there was an infestation of frogs. So the only frogs that I'm good with are the frogs that are behind me on the screens. Those are the only ones that I am okay with. Anything else, not gonna happen, okay? That's not for, so like, just frogs everywhere, all over your house, in your food, not it. It's a no from me. The third plague was, we're going through the infestation theme, an infestation of gnats. So first of all, why is there a G in the word gnat? Gnat, it's very confusing and unnecessary. And I hate the spelling of that word almost as much as I hate the idea of like those little monsters like covering people and animals. And even get this, like it even says that like the dust in the land, it turned into gnats. So what I can say for sure is that if Swiffer dusters were a thing back then, their sales would have been through the roof at this point. So the fourth, again, we're going through the infestations as an infestation of flies. Similar theme, again, just leveling up to flies. And what gets me about this one is that it says in the Bible that the whole land of Egypt was thrown into chaos by flies, which is kind of crazy to think that like some little insect could do that. But to be fair, every time I see a wasp, it ruins my day and I have to go inside. Earlier this week, I was doing some work on my deck. Wasp comes, I'm like, that's it, we're done. So I couldn't imagine just swarms of them everywhere constantly. The fifth plague, God strikes Israel's livestock. Now this is just beyond a major inconvenience. This would have taken out some people's methods of transportation, like if they used camels to get around, their livelihood, their sources of sustenance. And like all of a sudden, like being a veggie farmer would have sounded like really appealing. Number 6, okay, you tracking with me? Number 6, boils break out on the Egyptians and their animals. I don't have a ton to say on this one because the idea of looking up boils on Google to think of something funny to say was really gross. So I'm gonna just leave that to you guys in your imagination. Number 7, we have hail and thunderstorms. Now this is one we can maybe relate to a little bit more with our weather sometimes. And this destroyed even more livestock, crops, and structures and just left so much destruction in Egypt. Number 8, we're back to the infestations here. We got an infestation of locusts. Now locusts are just like grasshoppers, but they fly, which to me for some reason feels so much worse. I'm not really, again, like a fan of the whole massive group of bugs thing. And, there were so many that you couldn't even see the ground. And so they were kind of the cherry on top from the last plague because they ate all the crops, everything that was left that was already ruined from the hailstorms. And this led to a very severe famine. Now the thing about famines, not my scene, okay? Right now I don't know if you guys knew this, but we are living in a sriracha shortage. Like the good sriracha, like with the green cap. And like I ran out a couple months ago, like finally after having like a decent stockpile, and like my food hasn't tasted the same, you guys. Like it hasn't. And every time I go to Earl's and ask for the chicken street tacos and they're like, we're out of chicken, like my life is over. So to be in an actual famine, not my scene, what can I say? Number 9 is darkness. There's a thick darkness that took over the land, like you could feel it. And it made it so that no one could move around or see. Again, not for me. If you want to see me really stressed, ask me to drive on the highway in the dark. And I will cry and say no. Like I need constant visual awareness of my surroundings. So I would not be thriving here. And the last one, the most severe of all of the plagues, was the decree of death on all of Egypt's firstborn sons and livestock. So by show of hands, like, are there any guys in the room who you were the firstborn male in your family? You were the firstborn male. Any of you guys? Oh, it would have really sucked to be you guys in this story. Man, I don't know what to say, but like all of a sudden, gender inequality sounds really good for me right here. I really didn't know if I should put that one in there, so sorry, Jeff, but anyways, that's a brief insight into the events that took place in this part of Moses' story. And I like barely gave those any justice, so I'd encourage you to read up on them in the book of Exodus. It's chapters 7 to 12. But what I want to focus our attention in on is the heart conditions of 3 individuals in this narrative: Moses, Pharaoh, and God. And what I believe we can take away from this story is that the condition of our hearts matters. The condition of our hearts matters. This is an idea that is repeated throughout the Bible. We're told to guard our hearts, that the heart affects how we act, what we say. Our hearts are the seat for our emotions, our morality, our human choice, and the way that we engage with faith. And while people may look at appearances, God looks at our hearts. And really, we can see these ideas actively present throughout the story of the plagues. So first off, let's look at the heart of Moses. A quality that we see in his heart is that of obedience. Earlier in the book of Exodus, he was pretty doubtful in his own ability to carry out what God wanted him to do. But at this point in time, when God gives him and Aaron instructions, the next verse follows with an indication that they just go and do it. No questions asked. And that's really important because the freedom of the Israelites was dependent on Moses' willingness to do what God asked him to do. Now, I don't know about you, but this would have been a very difficult plan for me to carry out. My natural tendency is to avoid conflict, like the plague, pun intended. But like someone bumps into me and like I say, I'm sorry. So the idea of going up to a political leader who hates me and my ethnicity and demanding freedom is not something I would be overly eager to do. And maybe some of you already have like a speech prepared if you see the politician you hate the most and you're just ready to give it. I'm not that person. And so, thankfully, Moses, he has confidence. For me, if I was around, just like an intimidating character, I'd probably just crumble into a ball and forget how to speak English. But Moses doesn't do that. He shows up with courage and readiness to listen to God's instruction without fear, doubt, or hesitation. Moses also demonstrates a heart of trust. This ties in closely with his obedience. In Exodus 6, we can read God's promise for Israel's freedom and redemption in verses 6 to 8. Here's what it says. Therefore, say to the people of Israel, I am the Lord. I will free you from oppression and will rescue you from your slavery in Egypt. I will redeem you with a powerful arm and great acts of judgment. I will claim you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord who has freed you from your oppression in Egypt. I will bring you into the land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as your very own possession. I am the Lord. And this all sounds, pretty great, but the journey isn't easy. Primarily because of the opposition of Pharaoh, which God does warn him about. And we can read about that in Exodus 4, verses 21 to 23, where it says, And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I have empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart so he will refuse to let the people go. Then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn. I commanded you, let my son go so he can worship me. But since you refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. Even despite having that knowledge, it would have required a crazy amount of trust for God to come through like he said he would, especially in a situation where there was so much resistance. I think for me, after a while, I would probably start to get frustrated that God wasn't fulfilling his promise in a timely manner, or I'd be scared that, maybe I heard him wrong, or that freedom would actually never be found. There were even times throughout certain plagues where it seemed like a victory was like so close because the Pharaoh would agree to their freedom if the plague stopped and then immediately would change his mind. So it was like hitting a wall over and over again. But thankfully, our guy Moses, he does not get discouraged. He does not waver. Instead, he places his trust in God and what he said he would do. And if we look at the heart of Pharaoh, it's very obviously in a contrasting posture to that of Moses. And that's because his heart was hard. More specifically, he refused to accept God's word and to submit to his will, despite the clear evidence of God's hand working all around him. Pharaoh, he continued to willfully oppress the Israelites and would not listen to the demands of Moses. He was stubborn and persistent in his cruelty against the Israelites. Now, what's interesting is that in the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh's heart is hardened by his own will. So he's hardening his own heart. But there's a shift in the pattern during the second half of the plagues. In all but one, the one with the hail, God actually hardens Pharaoh's heart. But why? Why would God do that? Well, there's some different takes on this subject. Some scholars believe that it was a punishment for previous sins. Others see it as like a needed intervention for divine power. And while that could lead us down like a whole rabbit trail of like free will and whether or not it's a thing, I don't think that's really what we should be focusing in on right now. But really what we can see is his heart condition. Pharaoh is given an initial opportunity back in Exodus 5, way before plagues happened, to let the Israelites go into the wilderness so that they can hold a festival in God's honor. And he responds by saying no and making his exploitation of them even worse. And God gives him 5 more opportunities to have a change of heart, to repent and to show humility. But he hardens his heart. And really what this points to is the consequences of disobedience and pride and not repenting. The story probably would have played out a lot differently if the state of Pharaoh's heart was softer. It was a hardened heart that paved the way for all of these terrible things to happen to his own people and even to himself, particularly when his own son dies in the final plague. His own ego and reputation was more important than the well-being of Egypt. And in the end, they all suffered and had to pay a really, really significant price. So we've looked at Moses' heart and Pharaoh's heart, but what about the heart of God in the story? There's 2 things I want to briefly touch on. The first is that God has a heart for justice. As we read earlier, he sees the suffering and the oppression of the Israelites, his chosen people, a people group that he loved so much. And when the time is right, he takes the action to relieve them from it. God's punishment towards Egypt for their exploitation, for their oppression, it shows that he does not stand for the mistreatment of people. Now, this doesn't mean that people won't suffer. Obviously, it wouldn't take us long to think of the different instances of injustice and suffering that are happening all around us. But, we can point to suffering as an outcome of sin entering the world. And the alleviation of justice may not happen right away. It didn't for the Israelites. But it was through God's plan, this like really elaborate 10 plague, it's like not a 10-step plan, but like a 10 plague plan. Through that, we have God's deliverance, and it shows his glory and power, and that was able to be demonstrated. And in the end, justice is served in a pretty unconventional way, and Egypt is forced to let the Israelites go, and they walk in freedom. And it all came about in a way where both groups of people, the Israelites and the Egyptians, were able to see the power of God at work and know that it was him who paved a way and who brought justice. It wasn't Moses, it wasn't anyone else. Literally the only answer was God. So God also has a heart for truth. And by this I mean that throughout the story, it's proven that he is the true and living God. Remember how I was talking about earlier, the cool party trick with like Aaron's staff turning into a snake? Crazy. Would have scared me, would have freaked me out, for sure. But the thing about this plague is that with this one, and 2 of the others, with the water turning into blood and the infestation of frogs, Pharaoh's magicians were able to replicate the same thing with their magic. But as it turns out, their magic streak ends because they were not able to replicate any of the other following plagues. Another interesting historical fact for all you cool Bible nerds out there, it may just be me at this point, but cool fact is that some scholars have addressed, when researching the story, is that the plagues could have been an attack on the powers of different Egyptian deities or false gods. So for instance, the 8th plague, if you remember, that's the locusts, that's the flying grasshoppers. I hate them. That could have exposed the weakness of this one deity who was literally responsible for protecting Egypt from locusts. Like they had one job. But clearly disproven, God clearly is God over that deity. And now it's important to look at this argument with discretion because there were like a ton of different gods that people would have been serving at that time. And the Bible doesn't really give us a clear explanation. But with each plague that takes place, with each thing that happens, God's astonishing and supernatural power is revealed. There was no magician that could outplague him and no false god that could spare Egypt from punishment. As much as God is a loving father and friend, he's also all-powerful and, has the ability, if he wanted to cause these crazy things to happen. And, we may not worship statues like they did back in Egypt or these false gods. But you know, at time there are things in our lives that can take God's place, whether it's a career or a relationship or school or money or material things or status or entertainment or our looks, whatever it is. You know, anything that overconsumes our time, our affections, our thoughts, our actions, those things are all idols too. And again, just like in the story, those things will not save us at the end of the day. You know, it's only God who has the authority and the ability to fully love us, save us, and protect us. And so as we wrap up tonight, I want to challenge you to think about your own heart. You know, the condition of our hearts matters because the heart has influence in our lives. Our hearts can lead us to having compassion and showing deep affection for people and wanting justice and a better world. But our hearts can also lead us to places of pride and corruption. You know, do you have a heart like Moses that is obedient to what God is telling you to do and trust in God whether or not things are really great or really terrible? Or maybe does your heart look a little bit more like Pharaoh's? You know, a heart that is hard or rebellious. And maybe that's an extreme, but maybe there's sin and things that just aren't of God, things that aren't good, that are taking over your heart. Maybe it's pride or jealousy or lust or anger. And the thing about our hearts, like I said before, is that God can only truly see what's there. You know, we can put on a face and pretend like everything's okay, even when it's not. We can fool our friends and our family and our pastors. We can even fool ourselves sometimes, but we can't fool God. You know, we can come to the project and hang out with our friends and have a good time and serve and be involved, all that good stuff, and spend our week sleeping around or getting wasted or watching porn or gossiping or blowing up at people. And we may not really think it matters because no one sees. You know, it's not like me, Jeff, Brett, and Ruben are like following you around, watching your every move. But God sees. And it matters to him, most of all, whether or not you are engaging in behaviors that will set you down a destructive path in life. And I'm not bringing this up to like shame or condemn anyone. That is not my heart at all. If anything, I'm with you in the process of working on my own heart posture. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak to someone who had just caused like a lot of hurt and a lot of pain in my life. And I'd spent quite a few years just like working through that. I felt like I was in a place of forgiveness, that God had really done like a transformational work in my heart. But I just hadn't seen this person since that happened. And I felt God just kind of say, hey, like you need to go to that person and you need to make peace and just like make sure that they know that everything's good on your end. And I was like, no, like, thanks for the suggestion. I'm not going to do that. And then he was like, oh, like, as if you have a choice. That's hilarious. So I was like, yeah, no, I'd love to not. That's what I kept saying. I was like, I'd love to not do that. But I could just feel this resistance, this tension inside. And really what it started to reveal were that there was some bitterness. There's a lot of bitterness in my heart. Like, I may have forgiven them, but there was still some stuff that I was carrying inside. And so, after going back and forth, I felt God say this, and it really got me. And he said, you won't be as effective of a pastor as you could be if you still hold on to this hurt. And I was like, oh, fine, I'll do it. And I was like, okay, like if there's just like a moment in time where it can just be organic and it's not weird and I don't make this person or anyone else uncomfortable, then like, fine, I'll do it. Know that I don't want to, but I will. And lo and behold, the next day that moment happens and I like know it, like my body knows that like, girl, like it's go time. And my sympathetic nervous system is like, she all up in here, like my hands are clammy, my stomach's in knots. Again, I'm like, I'd really love to not do this, but I know that I have to. And so I get up and I go and talk to this person, and we actually end up having like a very fruitful conversation. And as we're talking, I can just kind of like feel the bitterness in my heart just like dissolve and like melt away. And it wasn't easy, it wasn't fun. I, again, really wish that I didn't have to do it, but I left with closer alignment to Christ. And to me, that was worth the initial awkwardness of going up to that person. And I share that story And I got a whole laundry list of other things that I got to deal with. So know that, again, I'm not perfect. I'm not there yet, and I'm there with you. So in the book of Psalms, there's a guy named David, and he shares this really powerful prayer. And as we close tonight, I want to pray it over you. I invite you to just reflect on it as we continue in our time of worship together. What are those areas in your life that maybe aren't aligned with Christ? What are those things that are maybe drawing your heart to become a little more hardened? And it might not feel like that big of a deal right now, but maybe months, years down the line, you're in this place where you're like, why am I so bitter? Why am I so angry? Why am I holding all these feelings? And that might be why. So let's figure out the root. Let's get there. And I just encourage you that, you don't have to put a face up before God. Something that I learned a few years ago is that God knows everything. So there's really no point in trying to hide because he already knows. So if you approach him with honesty and hey, this is not good right now. Things are not good. This area of my heart, it's not it. He's there and he wants to meet you exactly where you're at. So let me read this prayer over you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. Lord, we thank you for your goodness and for your provision. Lord, that you have a heart for justice and a heart for truth. And Lord, I just pray that as we go into this time of worship, that you would just reveal those things in our hearts that maybe aren't so great. And it might be hard to acknowledge those things, but I just thank you for your grace, Lord, in that, when we come to you, that you're not angry, that you're not ashamed of us. But Lord, you want to meet us in our mess. You want to meet us in our mess. And that's the thing about us humans, we are messy. We are. We thank you that you're a God who just gets right in there and cleans us up and makes us as white as snow, that makes us pure and clean again. I thank you that there's nothing that can separate us from your love. So reveal those things in our hearts, Lord. And would we also just know that we're not alone? That all across this room, we are people, that we are young adults doing our best, doing our thing, trying to love the Lord, trying to live a life that's in alignment with the Bible. But we don't have it all figured out. We don't. And so, Lord, even if there's a moment where maybe there's even someone here tonight that we just need to confess to or share with, Lord, would we just lift each other up instead of tearing each other down? We love you and we thank you. Amen. Awesome. You can stand with us if you're able as we continue in worship tonight.